game we're going to look at with Alexei Shirov is against Gata Kamsky in Linares, 1993. And Alexei, this game's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, the opening, but also Linares 1993, you said, was kind of a turning point in your chess career at that time.
You mentioned that this was my first major success in the high category tournament, because it was 18th category tournament, my first 18th category tournament, and my final score 8 out of 13 was very good. I lost 2 games, but I won 5 games. I also made draws against Karpov and Kasparov in very interesting games.
Told me before that you had actually gotten your rating up to where you were number 4 in the world prior to that, and then you'd had a series of difficult results, and then some more difficult results, and your rating had dropped a bit, and that you said this tournament was kind of a turning point in that you worked very hard for it, and then you had a very good result, and it got you back up among the elite players in the world.
Yes, I remember that on 1st of July 92, when I was just 20 years old, I was already 4th in the world with a rating 2710. Up to that point, everything seemed so fantastic in my chess career, just like climbing, and like never reaching the top. And then suddenly, the series of bad results. And all the second half of 92, I was playing badly. The first month of 93, I was playing badly. And then in February 93, I had 1 month to prepare for Linares. And at that moment, I realized Linares is everything for me. If I don't manage this, I will not manage my chess career. So I had 1 month to prepare for it, for all the strongest players whom I had a lot of respect for, but whom I had to fight against. And although the tournament in Linares went very shaky, because I won first 2 games against Barev and Kramnik, and then I lost 2 games. I won 3 games, not losing anything, but the final result, as I told you, 8 out of 13 gave me very big satisfaction. And I think the present game against Kamsky probably was my best achievement in that tournament.
So the game with Kamsky, d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, he serves up the Grunfeld. Of course, this is a big favorite of Fischer's and Kasparov's, and you were saying that you yourself have even taken this up of late.
Yeah, I played it in my match against Kramnik right just a few weeks ago.
So after e4, knight c3, bc3, white sets up the exchange variation. You play the classical with bishop c4. He plays c5, bishop e3, castles, knight e2, knight c6. And now this is an interesting point in the opening. We saw many Karpov-Kasparov games where white would castle, and then black would play bishop g4 and get pressure on the white center, or exchange pawns, and then bishop g4, and you would get pressure on this pawn that's pinned on the long diagonal. And
yes.
Then white has a couple of ways to try and play with f3 or whatever, but black always gets counterplay.
Yeah, according to my match against Kramnik, which I already mentioned, black has enough counterplay. We had this particular line after castles, bishop g4 3 times in our match.
Instead, you played rook c1, and this was introduced into tournament practice by Lev Polugayevsky.
Yes, I must say, when I first time saw it, I just couldn't believe it. I thought Lev Polugayevsky just got crazy or something. I mean, did something wrong. I just couldn't understand it. With all my respect to Lev Abramovich, I just thought, no, this cannot work. Then I saw him winning 2 more games. I think he beat Korchnu in a very nice game in a tournament in Sweden in 1988. And then I remember I was in training session with Mikhail Tal and with other leading Latvian players. And I think it was Tal who said, this might be interesting. And okay, we looked at all the games we could see at that moment. And in fact, they were exclusively by Polugayevsky, because no one else picked up that idea. But we analyzed his games, we found some improvements for white and black in his games, and we realized that this was worth to try. So already in 88, I had this opening in mind. So I think I first time played it in 1990, or maybe earlier, I don't remember now, but it served me until 93, until the present game. And just few months after this game against Kamsky, it was Ilya Gurevich who, by the way, also beat me in this line in 1990, but it was not because of opening. But it was also him who found probably almost the refutation of the whole setup. About this refutation I will talk later.
The main point, though, with rook c1 is that after cd, cd, if black tries to get his normal counterplay by pinning the knight and putting pressure on d4, you can simply play f3.
And he has no knight a5 anymore.
And everything is absolutely rock solid for white, and he just has slightly more space and a good center.
Yeah, the white is just better then.
On the other hand, in chess, you get something, you give up something. Here, you've neutralized this plan, but black does have queen a5 check. And this is the whole point of Polagevsky's move rook c1, is that he allows his queen a5 check.
Yes, now, well, he would be happy not to allow it, but in chess you cannot have everything, so you have to accept it and play king f1. And now, completely different kind of game starts, because white hasn't castled. He cannot make any real development anymore, because if he tries to make an artificial castle, he will lose so many tempests. So the only real plan for white is to play h4, h5, and try to get the strong attack on the h file. If it works out, and then white will be better. If it doesn't work out, then the whole line is suspicious. Therefore, I should mention the move which is probably the best for black in this position. In '93, Ilya Gurevich played against Vtachnik in Bill Interzonal, and he played now right away queen a3. The idea is to place well the queen, which can later on come back to d6, but already threaten knight a5, and maybe take this pawn, maybe not, depends on what white is doing. So it turned out that if white plays h4, then black has a very strong move bishop g4, and white cannot play f3 anymore because black simply takes on e3 white's bishop. So, and no rook c3 because of queen takes e3. So this brilliant move, queen a5, queen a3, found by Ilya Gurevich, probably refutes the whole setup, but this became apparent few months after this game. So, such is theory in chess, that some things which seem rock solid or seem very nice, then some months later it turns out that they are practically incorrect.
Gata continued with bishop d7, which certainly seemed very logical. It connects the rooks, prepares to play bishop b5 at some moment to try and exploit this diagonal.
Yes, this was a theoretical move at that time.
And of course, you said white has one plan, which is to play h4.
Yeah.
And here he played rook at f to c8. And I believe one of the original outings in this opening, Sergei Kudrin played rook at a to c8, and later he ran into problems when he got mated on the h-file brilliantly by Polagevsky because his king had no escape. And that's why theory at that time thought that rook at f to c8 was correct.
Quite an interesting plan for black after h5, just to play knight d8, because knight serves defending the f7 square and also opens the c file. Okay, so this is a position I would like to talk a little bit about. It first occurred to me already in 1988 in all those training sessions with Tal. At that time, theory of this line was something like, I don't even remember, pawn takes, and then something like bishop h6, but which didn't really work out.
And you had one game with Kamsky earlier where you played f3,
yes,
and he played bishop a4 and got counterplay.
Yes, and that's what I want to say, that it was my idea in 1988 to play f3, just to keep the pawn on h5 and prepare king f2, and then if necessary queen g1, queen h2. My first try with f3 was not so successful because I lost the game against Ilya Gurevich in the World Junior Under-20 Championship in Santiago, the game which cost me the gold medal, because at the end me and Ilya Gurevich scored the same number of points, but he was proclaimed as the world champion because he had better tiebreak. Even if that game wasn't draw, I would be the world champion, but I lost it. So, but still, after the game, I analyzed it. In fact, 1 year later, I found new ideas, and I won 2 brilliant games with this f3 move. But in '92, in the tournament in Moscow, Gata Kamsky found a new idea after f3. He played bishop a4, made my pieces somewhat discoordinated. Later on, I made some big mistake in the game and I lost that game. I think theory went further, and then I saw some games which claimed that it was not so bad for white, but I already was doubting about the whole idea of f3 after I lost the game against Kamsky. So a few months later, I had to play Kamsky again, and I got the new idea, completely new idea, to play instead of f3, f4. The reason was that in some of the lines, I play f3, but later, in some positions, I have to play f3, f4 anyway. So my idea is to try to play the same plan, but with the pawn already on f4. Of course, it can never be completely the same. But then I realized that the only thing, real disadvantage of f4 is that sometimes it allows bishop g4. But it's already not the setup for black where bishop g4 is so useful, because he already lost the pressure over d4 pawn. His knight is already on d8. So this was the way f4 idea was born, and I think it was a very nice idea.
Game, though, Gata continued with the pretty standard plan of trying to exchange off these bishops.
Yeah, but this was prepared before the game, so.
So you went ahead and exchanged, and after queen takes, now one point of having moved your f-pawn is you're able to connect up all your rooks with king f2. And here he played e6, which you said was a good move. That stops you from advancing with d5.
This is a very important moment of the game. By this point, it becomes apparent that white cannot win this game by attacking anymore, because black has very solid defense, and also disadvantage of the f4 move is that I close the diagonal for bishop. So an f5 can never work because he already has enough hits on f5. So now the completely different idea comes up, and the idea is to change the queens and get the endgame with a space advantage. Well, but I think I never minded to play endgames either.
So you played g4, and you certainly do have a serious space advantage on the king side.
The funny thing is that g4 normally is considered as the attacking move, but here it's just the move preparing the favorable endgame. It's just that I don't want to change the rooks myself. I wait for him to do that, to offer the exchange of rooks and queens and then get the favorable endgame.
So in fact, he did go ahead and exchange. Rook takes, queen takes. And now, as you mentioned, the knight is a little passive and doesn't pressure d4, so he brought the knight back into the game.
I realized this idea, queen b1, so I want to play the endgame. Of course, he can try to avoid the endgame, but queen on b1 serves for other things too. For example, it can prepare f5, and if he wants to go with his queen, he has to go to a6, where the queen will be a bit passive. And now, maybe f5 is a good move, and then maybe I can think again about attacking his king. That's what I find the most fascinating in chess, that sometimes just one move before you have to think about the endgame, but then if something turns, then you again have to start thinking about attack. So it's never the same. So if he doesn't change queens, then I turn to the attack again.
Well, in the game, he went ahead and exchanged queens. And now you take with the rook, which gains a nice tempo against the b-pawn, and also causes him a little bit of discomfort, because rook b8, you might have some possibilities with d5, and so he pretty much has to play b6, but then that weakens him on the c file.
I can just put my rook on c file and be very active.
You went ahead and played f5 exclamation point and started utilizing your space advantage on the king side.
Yes. The point is that the immediate rook c1 didn't really work, because he plays rook c8 and then his next move is knight e7, and if he manages to exchange rooks, then white advantage becomes really minimal. So, or maybe there is no advantage whatsoever. So I have to try to use my space advantage but having rooks on the board. So I played f5. So now I would like to mention the following idea, that if he takes twice the pawn on f5, my intention was to take with the g pawn, but after g takes f5, I was not going to take back immediately. But I have a very, very strong intermediate move, which is h6. And now he has real problems where to go with his bishops. So, probably the best move is bishop f6, and then I think the best is just to start some positional pressure even with pawn down, to play e5, bishop h4 check, king f3. It's a very long-term compensation for the pawn, based on the space advantage. Yeah, and also on the strong d4 pawn, because after knight d7, white yet has nothing concrete for the pawn to prove the real advantage, but with some moves like knight f4, he just makes the position even stronger. Or there can be nice trick like rook g1 check, so, well, knight g6 seems the most logical answer, and then rook c1 takes take control on the c file. So, I don't know, maybe these are not the exact variations, but in general, my idea was in some variations I could even sacrifice the pawn for this space advantage. He should probably have gone for this line, because this would still give him reasonable drawing chances. After what he did, I think he is just much, much worse, probably even lost. He played knight e7, trying to collect this pawn on f5 in a comfortable way. Now it also seems that if I exchange the pawns on e6, he will later on have some rook f8 check or whatever, and if I play knight e4, he can play e5. The point is that I have again this very strong intermediate h6 move. So now he really has to decide what he wants to do. But in fact, he has only one option. He plays bishop f8. Bishop stays very passive, but it can still come to this diagonal. A very spectacular win would be in case of bishop h8. I would exchange the pawn, and after pawn takes, play e5. And this position is totally winning, because his bishop cannot come out of h8 anymore. And in the following play, I'm simply having piece up, so I'm just playing with one piece more, although in reality the material is different. Exactly the same story would be if he goes, for example, to f6, I play g5, and then he has to go to h8, so I play f6, again closing his bishop. So he must play bishop f8. But now it will be e6 pawn that becomes extremely vulnerable. Taking on a6, I had to realize that h6 pawn, although it looks strong, but it's not that important anymore, because what is now really very important is to create two passed pawns in the center. So I played knight f4, and now he has a tough choice. If he just takes my pawn, I take his pawn on a6. Well, he must change bishops, and I have clearly superior position because of these two passed pawns. So I just played d5, and then I also can centralize king. I can put my rook there just to always have the idea of rook f8 mate if his rook comes down. So this position is clearly superior. Another option for him would be to try to exchange these pawns in better way, but after e5 I can still get this kind of position, because I just take this pawn, he takes mine, and it looks like black is better because these doubled pawns here. And this would be, if now black was to move, he would be just winning with a move like bishop g7. But I have this tactical trick, knight d5. So, if knight takes d5, I just take it with a pawn, and then instead of doubled pawns, I have two strong passed pawns. So, he must take on e3, I take it. Again, he cannot change. He cannot play king f7 trying to protect his knight with the king, because then I play rook f1 check, and either after king e6 or after king e8 I have knight c7 check winning his rook. Neither he can protect his knight with the rook, because after rook e8 I have knight f6 check. So his only option in this position is knight c6, but then it turns out that these pawns is not weakness, but in reality is strength, because I play e6, the pawn becomes a passed pawn, he still doesn't have rook e8 because of knight f6 check, and my next move will be rook c1, rook will penetrate to c7, and black can just resign. I gave all this variation just to show that when playing knight f4, I had to see very precisely what was going to happen if he went for this forced variation with e5. But of course he saw this variation as well, and he played the most stubborn defense, king f7. Here I thought altogether for almost 1 hour. I was like 20 minutes looking at this position and couldn't find a clear way. So I played knight h3, logical move, threatening knight g5 check. He has the only answer, king g8. I looked at this position for maybe 15 more minutes and couldn't find a clear way to win. So I just was checking one thing, the other. I had several different ideas, but none of them convinced me completely. So for the moment I just played knight f4. I wanted to look at the position with knight on f4 once more. He played back king f7 and offered draw. He thought that, well, which made me a little bit angry, I must say, because my position is clearly superior. Sure, but this also made me work even harder on finding the winning idea. So one of the ideas was actually to put knight on d3 and then later on e5, continuing with the space advantage. And maybe this was one of the best ideas in this position, but I like even more what I did. What I did now had to be based on also very precise, in some variations, even 10 moves calculations. So knight h3 back, king g8. So we already had this position, but now I play knight g5. Because now, if I play knight f4, he would already be able to claim draw, not just to offer. So knight g5. So now we already saw the position after bishop takes h6, knight takes e6. But he plays now e5.
And now if you play pawn takes pawn and he plays bishop h6, it's not as good for you as before because you don't have the knight coming to d5.
Exactly. And then I'm simply much worse because these pawns are not so strong anymore.
So of course you had to anticipate this, and now you played d5, which gives you a connected pass pawn.
Yeah. But it also became apparent to Gata that after taking, I would have clearly superior endgame by playing knight e6. So, but there are some variations which I had to see in a very precise way. Yes, bishop takes e3, king takes e3, rook c8. With the idea after d6 to give check. Because if I play king d2, there is a nasty trick. He can play rook c6, and it's not only that I cannot take his knight because he takes my knight back and wins my pawn, but it's also that after d7 he has rook d6 check, and then he wins the pawn on d7 and the position becomes completely unclear. It's still not worse for me because I will have rook f1, but probably draw will be the most what I can make out of that position. So, but after rook c3 check I have a better idea here. I can just play king f2 and, well...
And then on rook c2 check?
And rook c2 check, king to g3. So now if he can keeps on checking, I can hide on h4. So one day he has to play knight c6 anyway, but then I play d7, just intending to win the knight, or also intending to play rook f1 next move. And after rook d2, well, now I can play rook c1 winning the knight, or I can also play rook f1. For example, if he played, didn't give the check on the c2, he would play rook d3 in this position, but I would play rook c1 and I would win his knight. So that means that rook c8 is tricky, but it doesn't really work. So his other idea could be to try to play knight c8, put the knight on solid position. So after knight c8, it looks like it's stubborn defense because he can put his knight to d6. But white's pieces are so much better that I can play rook c1, knight d6, then move away this knight from here by playing rook c6, knight f7. And now it seems to me that just the best way to win is king d3. Know that it's clear that d6 doesn't really work because then he plays knight d8 and he can change knights. And this rook endgame is not so clear because he also comes quickly with his king to h6. Meanwhile, if I just play quiet move, king d3, he is left without counterplay. But if now he plays knight d8, I just take it and I play king c4. And there is no way for him really to prevent this plan d6 and king on d5. For example, if he plays king f7 with the idea rook c7 then king f6 and if d6 then king e6, I'm really not in a hurry. I can just play a move like g5. And for example, rook d7, he tries to defend it. And now, well, he has no counterplay at all. I can just try to improve my position and then one day collect that pawn. For example, I can play a4 and it's just zugzwang. He has no useful move at all.
Yeah, he can't move the king because rook check and you take.
Yes.
And he can't move the rook because rook to the 7th check is deadly. Yeah. And he has real problems.
But I had to see that this rook endgame would be winning when I already was hesitating this knight h3, knight f4, and when I finally played knight g5, I had to see that this rook endgame would probably be winning. So he played knight c8. The drawback of this is that this h6 pawn will stay alive. Although for the moment it's not necessary that it stays alive. I play rook c1. He can still take the pawn on h6, but I play knight e6 and we get to the same variation as already was shown in the previous note. So he played knight d6, but now if I continue like in that variation, for example rook c6, his little trick was that he can just try to play maybe rook c8, and if he changes rooks, although there is a big space advantage and he has this pawn bad, but one day he can activate his pawns there. Also, he's not forced to play rook c8 immediately. He can play maybe first bishop e7, and if I play king knight e6, then he takes it and
it starts to get a little unclear.
Yes. So, but I had a better idea. I played rook c7. I had to see precisely that if he takes the pawn now on h6, I play knight h7.
Well, this threatens knight f6 check, but of course it also allows him to play knight takes on e4 check.
But now the important trick. I play king f3. He cannot give check with the knight, so he takes my bishop. And now I do not take his bishop back, but I take his knight. And then also have powerful centralized king. And actually this is one of the known endgame principles, that you have to have centralized king. So, yeah, so this endgame is just winning. After bishop c5, you can play, for example, I don't know, knight f6, king.
And then maybe you just take and walk your king up, and then play king here, and then rook over mate.
Yeah, of course he can prevent this mate, but what he cannot do is to save the game. So he played rook c8. I played rook d7. Now he cannot take my pawn on h6 anymore because his knight is hanging. But at least he manages to activate his rook. So he played rook c3. Okay, I have really superior position. My pieces are very well placed, but I have to do something. So again, so I played knight takes h7, knight takes e4 check, and I played just king e2. So now the threat is to take his bishop on f8 and play h7, so, and queen.
So in the game, he went ahead and saved the bishop and put it out here where it could have some influence.
Yeah, but
then
now
here you collected the pawn on a7.
Yes, it was already getting slight time trouble. So since I didn't see a very direct way to win, I just preferred to stay with pawn up for a while.
And he played b5, saving the other pawn. And now here you played g5, and you started to come up with a plan to play knight f6 check and just keep pushing the pawns.
Now this knight f6 is a deadly threat.
So he played knight g3 check to harass your king. You went king d1.
Yeah.
And now, because of the deadly threat of knight f6 check, he has no time to play rook takes bishop.
Yes, because not even knight f6 check, but
Maybe rook g7 check
rook
first.
g7 check
And when he goes,
negotiate knight f6 mate.
he could give a few checks, but then in the end,
Yeah.
he's in the box.
Yes.
So he played knight back to e4 to cover this f6 square.
And for the moment, I just repeated the position because I decided that these were two last moves of the first time control, so I shouldn't risk absolutely anything. So I just played king e2.
And he played knight back to g3 because, of course, he's more than happy to repeat.
So king d1 and back knight e4. Fortunately, this time he didn't offer draw. He realized that I just did it to win time.
Now you played bishop to b6.
Yes, because after 40 moves were made, I had enough time to think and find the most precise winning plan.
So now he played rook over to f3. And here you played bishop d8, exclamation point.
Yes, because I still want to play knight f6 check. And now I will want to play knight f6 check and take it with the bishop, and then there will be no defense against h7, h8. So it's funny because my king is surrounded by 3 of his pieces. If to give him some moves, he could theoretically, for example, be my rook, I don't know where, somewhere here. And theoretically he could make some mate threats like this and then check, and then if king goes to c1, bishop a3, king knight c3 and mate. But in reality, his pieces are not that active to make real threats. So.
Well, here he gave it his best shot with a couple of rook checks.
So I played king c2.
And then rook f2, and then you played king b3 and attacked his bishop. And he went bishop c5 to attack your rook. You went ahead and played knight f6 check. And this is a very nice in-between move rather than just simply moving your rook. So he had to capture this.
So now I played rook g7 check. And after king f8, I realized that it's even better to take this knight with the pawn, because now I have already 3 passed pawns and it's clear that one of them will win.
So he went back to giving you checks with rook f3 check.
Yeah. I didn't really understand why he was giving these checks, because actually
And king d1.
the position was already to resign.
And then rook check.
Yeah, then king
King
e2.
e2. Rook f2 check.
So I played king e1.
And now he took the pawn on a2, having no more useful checks. And here you played bishop e7 check, which forces the exchange of bishops. But not only does it force the exchange of bishops, but after pawn takes check, it moves your pawn closer and it unites these two center pawns. And so after pawn takes, king over, and pawn d6, realizing there's no defense to rook g8 check or h7, he went ahead and resigned.
Yeah.
And so this endgame you said you consider to be one of your finest endgame achievements in over-the-board play.
Yes, because in fact we got the endgame almost right after the opening, and it was still pretty complicated. I had to find these precise moves like queen b1 in the right time, f5 in the right time, and then all this maneuver of knight h3, knight g5, which, and after e5 to play d5 to give him h6 pawn, but to realize that there were at that moment more important things than the h6 pawn. So I think, yeah, I was very happy to win this endgame like this.